State of Cannabis.
This is the State of Cannabis News Digest, a roundup of this week's key developments in the cannabis industry. Before we get started, a quick note. This is our final episode of the year. As we close out 2025, we want to thank you for spending part of your week with us, staying informed, and following how cannabis policy, markets, and access continue to evolve across the country. We'll be back in the new year with fresh reporting and updates. But for now, let's take a look at where things stand as 2025 comes to a close. Our top stories.
As 2025 comes to a close, this episode looks at the growing gap between cannabis access and affordability across the U.S. Kentucky's first dispensary sells out within days. Michigan businesses cut jobs ahead of a new wholesale tax, and Ohio faces a possible statewide vote over hemp THC restrictions. Continue listening to learn about Maryland's move to allow off-duty medical cannabis use for firefighters and New York's continued expansion of adult-use licenses amid leadership changes.
And now here is the deeper look at the key events in the cannabis world this week.
As we close out 2025, one of the clearest signals in medical cannabis isn't coming from legislatures or earnings calls, it's coming from patients. According to a multi-state survey conducted by statecannabis.org, nearly 78% of medical cannabis patients report daily use, most often to manage anxiety, chronic pain, post-traumatic stress, and sleep disorders. Flower remains the dominant product, used by more than 90% of respondents, and perceived effectiveness is high, with every participant rating medical cannabis either a 4 or 5 out of 5. But the downside is just as consistent. Nearly 87% of patients say high prices are their biggest challenge, followed by taxes, limited selection, and administrative costs. Satisfaction drops sharply when affordability enters the picture. So the takeaway from 2025 is straightforward. Patients say medical cannabis works, often very well, but too often the system around it does not. And that gap between effectiveness and access is shaping what comes next.
Kentucky's medical marijuana program reached a milestone in December and immediately exposed how fragile a new system can be. The state's first medical cannabis dispensary opened in Beaver Dam and drew patients from across Kentucky. Some arrived before sunrise, traveling hours for legal access. Within a week, every available product was sold, forcing the dispensary to close temporarily, not due to lack of demand, but because supply couldn't keep up. Kentucky law requires all medical cannabis to be grown and processed in-state, and cultivation only began months after legalization took effect. Nearly 15,000 patients now hold medical marijuana cards, but access remains limited. Prices are high, options are few, and operators say relief will only come as more growers and dispensaries come online. For now, Kentucky's early medical market is defined by strong demand and tight supply.
Michigan's cannabis industry is heading into 2026 under mounting financial pressure as a new 24% wholesale tax begins to reshape the market. At least 2 companies have already announced layoffs. C3 Industries says it will close its Weberville cultivation facility near Lansing in mid-February, affecting more than 60 workers. The company cited oversupply and the new tax as making the facility economically unviable. On the same day, Higher Love, based in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, laid off about 60 employees, nearly a third of its workforce, saying the math simply didn't work once the wholesale tax was added on top of existing cannabis taxes. The tax stems from House Bill 4951, a road funding measure projected to raise $420 million for local infrastructure. It passed both chambers of the legislature and survived a legal challenge from the cannabis industry. With the tax set to take effect January 1st, the broader question now is whether Michigan sees more layoffs, more closures, or a shift in cannabis investment to other states, especially in a market already struggling with oversupply.
In Ohio, cannabis policy may soon head back to the ballot box. After Governor Mike DeWine signed Senate Bill 56, tightening restrictions on intoxicating hemp products and modifying parts of Ohio's voter-approved marijuana law, opponents launched a referendum campaign to block it. The coalition, Ohioans for Cannabis Choice, plans to collect roughly 250,000 signatures in a 90-day window. If successful, SB 56 would be paused until voters decide its fate. The law restricts hemp-derived THC products, including beverages, limits where they can be sold, and aligns parts of Ohio's cannabis framework with federal hemp provisions. DeWine also vetoed a grace period for THC beverages and rejected language barring people with felony records from working in the marijuana industry. For consumers and businesses, the stakes are immediate. Where products can be sold, what rules govern hemp versus marijuana, and whether the system voters approved in 2023 remains intact or gets tightened heading into 2026.
In Maryland, cannabis policy is colliding with workplace realities, especially in public safety. Howard County is rolling out a revised substance abuse policy for its fire and rescue services, the first major update since 1991. Under the new rules, uniformed firefighters will be allowed to use medical cannabis while off duty, provided they submit valid authorization and avoid use within 12 hours of a shift. The policy also updates testing standards, including reasonable suspicion protocols and post-accident testing. County Executive Calvin Ball says the changes reflect the health realities firefighters face, including chronic pain, sleep disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Union leaders say the agreement took more than 2 years to negotiate and was approved by more than 89% of members. Now they want to take the policy statewide. With Maryland's 2026 legislative session beginning in January, firefighters plan to push for a bill that would extend off-duty medical cannabis protections across the state, a sign of how cannabis is increasingly being treated as a legitimate medical tool in high-risk professions.
New York's legal cannabis market continues to expand, but with an emphasis on structure and oversight. At its December meeting, the Cannabis Control Board approved 38 new adult-use business licenses, bringing the statewide total to more than 2,000. The approvals spanned the supply chain, from cultivation and processing to retail and micro-businesses, with 44% going to social and economic equity applicants. Regulators also announced expanded support for the state's metric seed-to-sale tracking system. Retailers now have until January 12th of next year to enter existing inventory into the system, easing short-term pressure while reinforcing long-term compliance expectations. The meeting marked the first since leadership changes at the Office of Cannabis Management, following the resignation of the previous acting executive director. Officials say the focus now is stability, accountability, and protecting public health as the market continues to grow.
And that's where we'll leave it for this year. Thank you for listening, for sharing the show, and for staying engaged with the issues shaping cannabis policy and access across the U.S. We'll be back in the new year with more reporting and analysis. Until then, we wish you a safe and restful holiday season and a healthy, successful start to the new year.